The March of the Lich King expansion has been out for about a week, and I think these are the best decks for you not only to hit Legend, but for you to hit the top ranks in Hearthstone. I'm going to do something a little different for this video, rather than going through a bunch of different decks that I think are viable, because, spoiler alert, I have 13 decks prepared for this video. I always get you with that clickbait of the top 5, top whatever, but I got 13 decks prepared in this video, but I'm going to be going through the top, essentially, 5 classes in Hearthstone, and I'm going to show you all the decks that you can play with those current classes. And right now, I think that Deathrattle Rogue is the deck that is probably the most infectious deck that I've ever seen on ladder, not just because of the infectious ghoul, but the real power of this deck is because of Scourge Illusionist being able to be pulled out from sketchy information, so that way you discount a lot of your Deathrattle minions to essentially 1 mana. Like, Burning Blade, Acolyte, Infectious Ghoul become 1 mana, Invincible becomes 3, and it's just so much easier in order to combo Deathrattle synergies together with, like, Counterfeit Blade, with Forsaken Lieutenant and Shadow Shambler. There's just a lot of ways that this deck can create completely unfair decks, to the point where this is the most popular deck in Legend, even after the 2 days after my video. This deck is still really good, and if you want more information about that deck, there will be a lot of videos in the description below with the with coverage of these lists that I've already talked about. But I just want to make this video in order to stress to you guys that this deck is here to stay unless something changes. Rogue is definitely the most powerful class in Hearthstone right now, and that's not only reflective in the stats, but whenever you go up against this deck, you just understand that when, like, for example, when Draka and, 0 mana nulls are still a possibility, you have Edwin drawing for a whole lot. There's just a lot that Rogue can do, and Concoctions is another way that you can take the Rogue class if you want to, like, not play Deathrattle, or if you're tired of seeing a bunch of ghouls. Honestly, I think ghouls are a lot more fun than this deck. This deck is a lot more reminiscent of old Maestro Rogue, but it does use the new Concoctions, which are a little bit fun, I have to admit. They may be very random, and going up against a Rogue may be very frustrating, but when you're behind the wheel of this deck, it is a lot of fun. There's a lot of things that you can do, but there's also the aspect of adding Mailbox Dancer to this deck in order to potentially give you a turn 1 pop-off, because the turn 1 pop-off, in case you guys haven't seen, is just literally Mailbox Dancer on coin. So that way you can coin it on turn 2, Shadow Step twice, as well as having your Shadow of Demise in hand, and then having Necrolord Draka ready to go. You can technically do this on turn 1. It's actually possible, believe me, and I just think that Rogue is, like, absolutely broken, and something might need to change with it, because it's just... Rogue is, it's warping the meta to where you need to either beat Rogue or you have to be Rogue in order to win, and I just really don't like being put in that kind of position. And another reason for that is just good old-fashioned Miracle Rogue. This is the Mailbox Dancer list that I was telling you about, because I think that this combo is just way too good to say no to. At times, it can be a little bit clunky, and this deck is a little bit more challenging to run than the Concoctions version. It's all in on running Putricide. But I think that if you're a lot more familiar with what Mailbox Rogue was in the previous expansion, you will like this deck a lot, and it literally has the turn 1 high roll, where I don't think any class could beat it unless they decide to run Ooze. And who is running Ooze in today's meta? Absolutely nobody. So Rogue is definitely the king of the meta, with Miracle Rogue, Concoction Rogue, and definitely Deathrattle Rogue ruling the meta. So I believe that if you're a Rogue main, you're really happy right now. Next up, we have Fell Quest Demon Hunter, and this is quickly becoming a deck that Zacho from Vicious Syndicate thinks is going to be absolutely game-breaking and has to be nerfed. What is on the chopping block that he wants to get nerfed? He wants Unleash Fell to get nerfed to some capability, and I think I kind of agree with him, because this deck can do some very disgusting things, and if anything, this should just be it should be minions. It shouldn't be enemies, because when you're able to stack so much spell damage, where Silvermoon Arcanist is the main bread and butter of your deck, to where literally you don't even have to worry about its battle cry. It's just a 3 mana plus 2 spell damage. Plus 2 spell damage is always going to be good, almost no matter what the downside is, especially when it's this cheap. And there really is no downside to running this in the deck. Like, there literally is no downside, because all of your spells are disconnected and almost nothing hits anything. Like, let's go through all the spell damage cards. There's Relic of Extinction, there's Unleash Fell, there's Fell Barrage, there's Mark Scorn, and that's it. Those are all disconnected and attack random enemies, so this literally has no downside whatsoever. So when you add the quest reward and being able to discount cards, it's just absolutely ridiculous what this deck can do, and you don't even need the quest reward for most games. You don't even need Jace a lot for some games, and there's actually a different list that I want to showcase. This is the deck that McBanterface He's the one that kind of added some popularity after he hit like, I think like top 20 legend or something with it. But then after changing around the deck a little bit, he decided to put in Furies because there are a lot of instances where you just want to throw out a card. Doesn't really matter. Fino is even saying to take out Jace, but I don't think we do that just because we need a backup plan just in case we have to play our spells for removal purposes so we don't die. But I think that Jace is... I hate looking at Jace because I always get this card in my mulligan, but I think he's required in this deck just so that way you have that added consistency in case you have to play your spells. Because the only reason why you run Jace is so that way if you discount him, you can play it with like a Silvermoon Arcanist and then suddenly you have all of this ridiculous value possible. Jace is also a really good post-quest if you do happen to put that quest line, but the consistency of this deck does not rely on Jace and it does not rely on the Kurtrus quest line reward. It really just comes down to Silvermoon Arcanist and Guild Trader doing ridiculous things with all the spells in this deck, and I think that this deck is on the chopping block potentially to get nerfed, but the only nerf that really needs to happen is that Unleash Fel just needs to target minions, so that way you can still do Unleash Fel into like Fel Barrage, because this deck doesn't work if there's minions on the field. This card is very crucial, but I think being able to hit face as well is just a little too much. I'm not going to spend a lot of time talking about this deck. I'm pretty sure you guys don't want to even see this deck right now. And the last thing that you want me to do is to recommend this deck to people. But unfortunately, my recommendation doesn't matter because Norwis has been sitting at rank 1 legend with playing pretty much exclusively only Blessed Priest on multiple servers. So if anyone is responsible for nerfing Priest is 100% Norwis, but in any case, it's just this deck just needs to go for the sake of most people's sanity, because I cannot tell you, if I see one more turn 4 summon a whole bunch of stats in one turn where it's literally impossible for me to clear, I think I'm gonna lose it. And this deck is just absolutely powerful, and it's even so powerful where Sunwell is for some reason added in the deck in HS Replay, and if you don't like the Sunwell, you can always just add the Light It Burns. It's got plenty of silence, so you don't need to add like Focused Will or anything like that. But in any case, this deck is just absolutely, it's just disgusting. However, if you want to play Priest and you still want to be good against Rogue, recently No Hands Gamer took this abomination, and I'm calling it abomination because Priest is playing eggs, and just look at this deck. There are so many cards that I haven't even seen yet on the ladder that are just showcasing in this deck, and this just goes to show that No Hands Gamer is just a cut above most Hearthstone deck builders, or leagues above Hearthstone deck builders in my opinion, because I don't even know what made him, what possessed him to come up with this deck, but I think he just wanted to come up with an idea that was just screw Rogue, and according to his tweet, as of when he made this post, he was 100% against Rogue. I cannot speak to the power level of this deck, but I will trust No Hands Gamer because I don't think that... I'm mostly showcasing this deck because it's cool, but I also don't think that No Hands Gamer would be deceiving anybody with this kind of list. It does look clunky, but he had an insane win rate with it. You can't ignore how good this deck can be, not to mention that you're going to have the surprise factor of playing a 40 HP Priest deck in a meta where no one is anticipating it. I think Quest Priest is like the only other Priest deck that we're seeing that runs Renathal. But I think this deck is a great idea if you're trying to surprise the ladder, but you can only play this deck if you can last to the late game. If you are not a control player, this is not going to be a deck for you because there's a lot of decision making that needs to be done. So the skill cap of this deck is definitely really high, but I would say if you guys are trying to play something new with a lot of new cards in it, this Undead Priest might actually fulfill that role. Next up, we have Druid. Yeah, that's right. The top 4 classes in Hearthstone right now are Rogue, Demon Hunter, Priest, and Druid. Not a lot of things have changed since the previous patch, unfortunately. Like, these new cards did shake up the meta, but there's not really a lot of differences because these OP decks from the past are still really good. Even though Sire Denathrius did get nerfed, I think this is the only deck that you can run this card in right now because there's no other class that can nearly summon enough minions like Druid can. Druid has so many minions that it can summon thanks to Scale of Nyxia, thanks to Topior, thanks to the random generation that you find off of Planet Evidence. There's a lot of things this deck can do, not to mention that this is just the Astalor combo. Armor Druid is really good right now. It's just a question of if 40 card or if 30 card is better, but if you're running 40 card, you pretty much have to run it like the old Sire Denathrius where you're focusing on ramp. But if you're wanting to play a little bit of a different deck, this is my version of 30 card. I think we should probably change this around. Maybe we take out Miracle Growth and put in a Jerry Rig Carpenter. But one thing to keep in mind about this deck in particular, due process. If we are running Due Process, that does nothing but help Demon Hunter matchups, so I don't really know how much we want to do that. You could always just take out the Due Processes and put in Miracle Growths if you do like that idea. But in any case, I think this deck has a lot of potential because when it comes to Armor Druid, you just need to draw the combo. And what is the combo? The combo is a Nubricon, Bran, as well as the Astalor. And all you really need in order to flex with these 3 cards is either Guff, an Innervate, or an Earthen Scales. And what exactly do I mean by that? What I mean by that is there are 3 different ways essentially to pop off this combo. Either with 11 mana, with 10 mana, or with literally all of the mana in the world. So all the mana in the world obviously is Guff, so you can throw out as much stuff as possible. But the main reason why this combo is so flexible is because a Nubricon into Earthen Scales charges Astalor almost perfectly. So you can easily set up the Bran Astalor combo with just an Earthen Scales. Or if you want to go a step beyond that, if you have Innervate, you can already play Bran, play Innervate, and then play the Nubricon, and then it's so much easier for this combo to work. So that's why I think that 30 card has a lot of potential. But this deck is a lot more volatile to aggro and a lot more volatile to scams like with Rogue. So unless you hit like the nuts, it's really hard to sometimes get a win with this deck. That's why the Renathal has become so popular, because that extra 10 HP really does matter, especially in a class like Druid, where if you can just hit your ramp turns and then suddenly you're like 9 mana by like turn 4, turn 5, then you can easily get back that HP that you lost. So that is a really big advantage. But in any case, Druid is definitely a top tier deck, and I would highly recommend it to anyone that is wanting to play with either some new cards or really just likes Astalor, because I gotta admit, this is the best legendary that I think we've seen in quite a long time. Next up is actually a deck that I have not tested yet, but I've seen a lot of people talk about this archetype, and honestly, this just looks like a sweet deck in general. This is probably the biggest question mark deck that I'm going to throw at you today, but the stats that I saw in this deck on HS Replay were actually kind of surprising. This deck doesn't have that big of a sample size, but this deck is seeing play at top 1000 Legend, and the main reason why I'm highlighting it, let me just pull up the stats so that way I'm not talking out my arse here. But according to HS Replay, this deck has positive matchups going into Fell Demon Hunter, going into Ramp Druid, and most importantly, going up against Deathrattle Druid. Miracle Rogue is a little bit of an unfavorable matchup, but the main reason why I'm showcasing this deck is because it's supposed to counteract 3 of the most popular decks that you're going to be seeing on ladder. And this is just like kind of showcasing the different types of archetypes that are viable right now. There are the combo decks, there are the scam decks, and there are these sort of aggressive early tempo. I really don't know how exactly to describe this deck because it is kind of a scam, but it does depend on playing a lot of early game minions because you do have cards like Bloodlust. I believe Jombre ended up bringing this to one of the invitationals that was recently happening over in Europe, but I don't remember if he ended up winning a lot with this deck. I just know that he ended up placing second, and I saw a really cool game where Double Bloodlust was able to win the game after like playing an entire grinder of a game where all he needed was just like 1 or 2 minions to stick for that lethal, and it was just very impressive to see this deck actually get a win. So I will admit, this is definitely the biggest question mark deck that I'm throwing at you today, but I think that the potential of this deck is actually really high because everything I've heard about Evolved Shaman has just essentially been nothing but positivity. It's just whether or not it can keep up with all of this, I'm not 100% sure, but if somebody knows about Evolved Shaman, feel free to let us know in the comments because I do believe this deck could be a real thing. It's just a matter of how well it does against the other meta decks. But those are the top 5 classes in Hearthstone, but because I love Death Knight so much, and there actually are some good Death Knight decks, I have 2 more decks that I want to show you. One is my own creation, but we'll go ahead and save that one for the last deck. This is probably the best Frost deck that I have seen on stats. I have not tested this myself, but I think that it's really interesting that the curve of this deck has completely shifted from going towards late game strategies, but since Death Knight is not able to really survive in this meta right now, especially with Druids and Miracle Rogues running around, you really need an early game curve, so that's why I kind of like the look of this list. I'm going to be trying this out today on my stream at twitch.tv/ClarkHELLSCREAM, so if this video is live, most likely I am live too, so you might as well come out and check out the Twitch channel. But in any case, I'll be testing out this deck today to see whether or not it's bait. I just like the look of it so much. to the point where playing Lady Deathwhisper on turn 4 is just probably always correct as long as you have at least 1 or 2 Frost cards in hand. I doubt the power level of this deck just because Death Knight has a terrible matchup against Druid. I mean terrible matchup against Druid. I think it's literally 70, almost 80% favored for Armor Druid because you just literally don't have enough burst. You can't deal with their armor and you can't deal with their board, so there's literally nothing that you can do in those matchups. But against Rogue, maybe you have a chance because you have like Howling Blast, you have Icy Touch, so you can keep freezing their face over and over again if they make a big weapon. But I think the potential of this deck is very, very noticeable. Maybe you can beat up aggro druids with like a Death Chiller or a well-timed Remorseless Winter, especially on coin. Rhyme Fang Sword can set up ridiculous combos with Lady Deathwhisper. This deck is pretty much going all in on like the idea that I originally had with like Frostworm Furies. But unfortunately, going all in on that strategy is not that good, so you need to be able to supplement the deck with some sort of tempo. So I think this deck is very, very close to probably the most optimum 40, but I'm working on another video immediately after I'm done recording and editing this to where I will be talking about Death Knight. So if you guys want to hear that kind of stuff, make sure you subscribe to the channel because it's gonna be my next video. But enough about Frost Death Knight. What's the other Death Knight deck that I have prepared for you? I believe I have the optimized version of this deck. Unholy Aggro is unfortunately not the greatest deck for Death Knight, but it is the most consistent in terms of games. And if you get the scam, there's not a lot of people that can stop you. The Hawkstrider Rancher is really the bread and butter of this deck. I mean, honestly, it's not even the bread and butter. It's the meat and the potatoes of this deck because this card carries like none other if you play it on turn 2, and then suddenly you have all these 1-drops. The original deck had like Banshees and I think had Bone Digger Geist, but I have taken them out for 2 different kinds of peasants, the original peasant and then the infected peasant. So that way you at least have card draw possibilities and you have ways of being able to stick onto the board. I personally do not like Chillfar and Baron, so you could easily sub this out for like a Necrotic Mortician and potentially even like an Astalor in this deck. I don't really think Astalor is the greatest, but I still have him included anyway. But I'm not really sure what card to take out because card draw is just so important in this deck. But if you play this card on 3, it just doesn't feel good. So you can probably easily cut this for another 2-drop of some kind. But I just unfortunately could not figure out what to cut. Maybe you take out 1 Baron and put in another Mortician so that way you have more Discover capabilities. I'm really not sure, but the thing about Mortician is that you need a minion to die, and a lot of times you don't want to have to trade your minions. You want to just go face and let your opponent deal with your board. So this deck is still kind of undergoing some changes. I'm not really sure what the best 30 card exactly looks like, but I believe this is very close. The deck originally had Banshees, and I'm not a fan of Banshee at all. I think it should 100% be Peasant no matter what. So that way your opponent either has to waste a coin if you play this on turn 1, or if you combo it with Hawkstrider, it has a better chance of being able to survive. So I think that this deck has a lot of potential, but until we get some nerfs, I really don't imagine Unholy Death Knight being the meta ruler that I thought it was a couple of days ago. But this still is the best deck to get the fastest amount of wins with Death Knight. So if you want to go for quick wins, I highly recommend this deck. But there you guys have it. Those are the best decks in Hearthstone according to me and according to my opinion, and I believe that my opinion is the best opinion. So if you agree with that, like this video, comment down below, and let me know what you think is the best deck in Hearthstone, because I believe we're getting nerfs on the 20th. I believe that we're getting nerfs in about a week from now, so I don't think there's going to be that many major changes, but I do believe that Rogue, Druid, and even definitely Priest. Yeah, those are going to be the 3 decks that definitely get hit. It's going to be hard to tell whether or not we're going to get any buffs, but I don't believe we need to buff anything yet. I'm going to be making a video about Death Knight and my opinion on it, so I don't think we need to buff Death Knight cards right now, but that'll be a conversation for another day. So make sure you subscribe to the YouTube channel to make sure that you're notified when that video comes out. So thank you so much for watching to the end of this video, and I'll see you later. Hopefully you guys have some good luck on the ladder. We'll see you for the next video.